Hey guys, in this tutorial I am going to be sharing how I made this high neck collar jacket. It's a simple jacket, no buttons whatsoever. The main thing about this jacket is the raised collar. If you want to learn how to do this, then you should see this tutorial up until the very end. My name is Ayomide. Just in case you're new here on my channel, I post sewing tutorials and pattern drafting tutorials. Now let's jump into this tutorial. For this particular sewing project, these are the materials that I used. I have this sample fabric here. It is about 2 yards. So the fabric here is 2 yards. I also have my lining here, and that's because I used a lining for the front. I did not line the back, however. I also have some other sewing supplies, my pattern master, ruler, measuring tape, scissors right here with me. The next thing would be to modify my pattern, which I have here. I have the front pattern on this side, and I have my back basic bodice block on the other side of my pattern paper. It is now time to proceed with modifying this pattern to achieve what I want. The length of this bodice block I have here is 26, but I shortened it later to 24 inches right where my dart ended. The width of the neckline is 2.5 inches, and that's because it's going to be a raised up collar. I don't want the width to be too wide. Also, I have 1 inch as my dart allowance right at the waist, and I left about 3.5 inches just before I drafted my front pattern. This would help me to draw in my collar when it is time. What I will do next is to determine the midpoint of my armhole, and that is because I want a princess seam dart or a princess dart, and the princess dart is one that comes from the midpoint of the armhole, and I have about 5.5 inches as the midpoint. I'm using my pattern master to draw in a curve that will stop on the bust line. I have my princess seam drawn out already. Now, in order for me to draw in my collar, I will need to attach a piece of fabric at the neckline of this pattern. After that is done, what I did was to square a line from the shoulder slant. Then I measured the neckline of the back. So I just placed my tape all around the neckline for the back, and it was 3 inches. That measurement, I marked it on that line that I had squared down. So for this, you must have drafted your back pattern already. Also, I squared another line across, and for this particular line, I'm going to be marking the length of my collar. I went for about 2 inches. Now yours can be more than that, but the more you mark, the bigger the bigger your collar is going to be. When you're working on a jacket, there is something called the break point, and it is at this point that your jacket would overlap. For this jacket, I'm marking 2 inches above the waistline as the breakpoint line. You can use your waistline, you can use your underbust line as your breakpoint as you wish. On that line, I would mark 1 inch, which would serve as the allowance for the overlap. And I have come to realize that 1 inch is fine. After that, I would connect from the length of the collar up until where I have my breakpoint. So for these, I initially started out with my marker, but I realized it would be safer to use a pencil to sketch out the connection first, and after I was done, or after I was okay with what I have, I can now use my marker to properly emphasize it. At the hem of the jacket, I want it to be curved instead of it to be pointed. I marked 4 inches above the length. Then I used my pattern master to create a curve that ended at the waist dart. This is just to make sure that that place is rounded and it's not sharp. Once I was satisfied with all of my markings, I used my marker to properly emphasize it, and also for clarity purposes for those of you that are watching. Next up, I added seam allowance along the shoulder slants, the length of the collar and the collar itself, all the way down to the hem. Right here I have the center front and the side front. At the side, I came up by 1 inch just to have a slant. This is also one thing you do to jackets. And I think I'm done with the front. Next is to work on the back. The first thing I did was to mark in my darts. Then I drew in my armhole. And I also drew in a princess dart for the back too. So I just measured what I have on the front, transferred it to the back, and drew in my princess seam line. Next up, I marked the length of the jacket, which is 24 inches plus ½ inch seam allowance, 24.5. Then I also extended, I did likewise for the side of the back jacket too. And this is all for my pattern. I have my pattern all cut out already. This is the center front. I have the side front. Here is the side back, and I have the center back next to it. I'm going to be cutting all of this on my fashion fabric, and also cut a lining also for the front. But for the back, I won't be cutting a lining, but I'm going to be adding 1.5 inch to the hem to turn the end of the back. This is my fabric after cutting out. This is the back. What I will do is I'm going to be joining all of these pieces together to form a single piece, and that's because there's going to be no zip at the back. And I added ½ inch for my seam allowance, so I'll just step on my sewing machine and join all of these fabric pieces together. I also have the front right here. I have my center front rather, and my side front, 2 pieces each, one for both sides of the front. I'll also repeat likewise, join one piece of the center front to one piece of the side front. I would repeat likewise for my lining too. So for my lining, I ironed in interfacing just for structure on the center front, and that's because the lining is quite light. So I'll also join these fabric pieces together. Remember, there is no lining for the back. I am done joining as I explained. This right here is one part of the front, and this is the other part of the front. I also have the back joined into a single piece of fabric. And another thing I did was to iron open my seam lines. This makes your work easy if you iron as you sew. The next step would be to join the 2 front pieces together along the collar. What I'll do is place right sides against each other and stitch it down by ½ inch, since that was what I added as my seam allowance. I will repeat likewise for my lining too. I am done, and here is what it looks like so far. And also this is my lining. I've also gone ahead to iron my seam lines open. Remember, I said it makes your work really neat as you sew. The next thing would be to use the lining on the main fabric. So I'm placing right sides of the lining against the right sides of my main fabric, and I'm going to be placing the crucial points together. That part where I have my collar joined, I'll place it on the top of each other and proceed to my sewing machine and sew this all the way around. So with this, I've used my lining to cover up the raw edges of my main fabric. I am done sewing as I explained. This is what it looks like after I was done sewing. So what I will do is turn it to the right side. I decided to show us the steps so that you can see exactly what I did. After turning it inside out, I also proceeded to iron this down, and here is the outcome. Now it is time to join both the front and the back together along the shoulder and also along the collar. To do this, I'm going to be placing the back against the front and match up that center back seam to where I have my collar there. and sew it all around the shoulder slant. In order to make this step very easy for me, I use my pencil to mark out the seam allowance, and this would serve as the line where I'm going to be sewing on my sewing machine so that I don't have to sew blindly. Another thing I did was to notch at the edge of the shoulder slant. That's the part where I would need to turn. This would also help turning at the sewing machine really easy. After this step was done, what I did was to pin my back to the front. So you need a lot of pins at this point in time, so just make sure you pin everything and you're good to go. This really helps me a lot to sew these parts because it can be really tricky. I am done, guys, and here is what my jacket looks like so far. At this point you can notch, or you can notch after you have done your overlocking. Now what I'll do next is to sew the hem of my back. Remember, I did not use a lining at the back, and the back has a 1.5 inch hemming allowance, so I'll just proceed to my sewing machine and sew that hemming allowance down, and I can now comfortably join both the front and the back together along the sides. This is what the back hem looks like after I was done. I love the fact that I could still maintain the curviness of the jacket. There's just something about your jacket being curved at the hem. Next up is to join both the front and the back together along the sides. At this point, you would want to add maybe 1/2 inch or 1 inch ease to the waist area because you don't want this to be too tight, and also because I'm not putting a button, so just 1 inch ease is okay and it's fine along the waist area. So far so good, guys. Here is what my jacket looks like. The last thing to be done is to fix a sleeve to this jacket. And for this particular jacket, I am opting for a basic sleeve block, no stress. I've gone ahead to cut it out. I have a detailed tutorial on my YouTube channel just in case you don't know how. Next, I would sew down the hem of the sleeve. After then, I will join it together along the sides, leaving some room that would enable me join it to the armhole area of the jacket. Guys, this is the outcome of the jacket after I was done. I love the way it came out, and I also love the outcome of the collar. So clean, so neat, standing perfectly, no issues. I think I'm going to be making this for myself because I made this for somebody else. If you found this tutorial helpful, make sure you give this a huge thumbs up. If you haven't subscribed to the channel, please click on the subscribe button below. Turn on your notifications for more videos, and until my next tutorial, make sure you stay blessed and have a wonderful day.